We are shocked not only are the victims juveniles, but the murderers are juveniles as well.
We see a lot of shocking cases, especially out of the Sunshine State of Florida. In this case, you have 3 very young suspects. At the time, one was 17, another one 16, and the youngest one was just 12 years old at the time of their arrest. All were arrested and charged with first-degree murder in connection to the murders of 3 other teens. But there's still so much more to this story.
Each and every one of them, in some shape or form, is associated with a gang. Basically, simple terms, there is no honor among thieves. And at some point, these 3 individuals turned on our 3 victims and murdered them.
I'm Elizabeth Millner with Law&Crime. So you have 3 suspects and 3 victims, but it looks like one of the boys charged in the case won't even be going on trial. He went forward with a plea deal, but like with many deals, it comes with strings attached. We're going back to March of 2023 for this case. On March 30th, 16-year-old Layla Silvernail was found on the side of the road. She was rushed to a local hospital where she passed away from her injuries. Now, the following morning, deputies found another body, this one of 17-year-old Michael Hodo Jr. Then another body was found the following day, also of gunshot wounds, this one of 16-year-old Camille Corals. All of their murders were connected, from what investigators say, but the details were pretty shocking.
As all of you are well aware, last Thursday, March 30th, we received a call near Forest Lakes Park, where our first victim, Layla Silvernail, was located suffering from a gunshot wound. She would later succumb to her injuries. The following morning, we responded to a location about a half a mile away and located a second victim deceased on the side of the road from an apparent gunshot wound. Then on Saturday, April 1st, my deputies located Layla's car abandoned and partially submerged in a pond about 9 miles from the location where she was found. My investigators located the third victim inside of the car. And I'll go ahead and tell you, because you've been asking me for specific details. She was located in the trunk. Now, I want to clear up before we get into those details. Based on the interviews, digital evidence from her phone, she was there of her own free will.
Marion County Sheriff Billy Woods kept it tight-lipped on who the third victim was during that press conference, but it was later revealed that it was 16-year-old Camille's body found in that trunk. Sheriff Woods said at the time investigators were quick to know who the suspects were. I mean, you can see 2 of the suspects on the screen at the press conference, but who are they? Well, a then 17-year-old Robert Robinson and a then 12-year-old Christopher Atkins, and then a 16-year-old Taj Bruton, who was actually on the run at the time the sheriff held this press conference.
The suspects were in the vehicle. This individual, who is a juvenile also, is who we're looking for. Now, I'm talking to the viewers. Some of you know him, you know where he is, and you need to turn him in. Now, I will get him. I will find him, and justice will be completed.
But the sheriff dropped a huge bombshell that all 3 teens, the victims included, were involved with robberies and burglaries, and that's not all.
Now, the investigators were able to determine that this group of juveniles were involved in committing burglaries and robberies, which they were referred to as a lick. Now, although we had out there that was gang-related, we have nothing specific to say that it was any rivalry or anything to such that cause. But however, each and every one of them, in some shape or form, is associated with a gang. Basically, simple terms, there is no honor among thieves. And at some point, these 3 individuals turned on our 3 victims and murdered them. 2 of them right there. They fled the scenes but left a lot of evidence in their wake. Through the cooperation of the agencies that I previously mentioned and my office, we were able to begin compiling all of the evidence and finding these killers. Now, we were shocked and saddened by the violence, as all of my citizens, because we are shocked not only are the victims juveniles, but the murderers are juveniles as well.
So Taj Bruton was arrested by U.S. Marshals 2 days after that press conference. Then in May of that same year, all three were indicted by a grand jury. But let's get into what investigators revealed in the arrest affidavit, specifically Christopher Atkins. According to the document, a witness reported to deputies that a car struck his garage dumpster. As he walked to the dumpster, he saw Layla bleeding from her head. She was still breathing when she was discovered. Another witness, whose name was redacted from the report, also recalled hearing the sounds of 4 or 5 loud pops, which she believed to be gunshots. This witness said after hearing the pops, she looked out of her window and saw a 4-door sedan drive off, but slowly, and that's when the car collided into the dumpster. She said she saw someone run out of the front passenger seat, only noting whoever it was skinny and wearing a baseball cap, but whoever was driving the car took off again after being confronted. So Layla was shot, but her car was gone. Investigators say the final 2 license plate reader detections were consistent with Layla's car traveling to where her body was found and where Michael's body was later found. Because as we know, the next day he was found unresponsive in a ditch and a bunch of blood was near his head. Now, authorities saw drag marks. Michael was wearing gloves and a ski mask, and his clothes were saturated in blood. A lot of Michael's portion was redacted, even his name. We only know his name through reports after the fact. So the sedan the witness saw was found. It was found near the edge of some water. Evidence techs opened the trunk and saw a body. Camille's name was also redacted out of the report, but as we know from the sheriff, it was her body found in that trunk. Investigators say her body was partially decomposing. When they pulled her out of the trunk, she had a gunshot wound to her right temple with close-range powder burns. She was also shot in the stomach. A friend told police both Camille and Layla had been staying at her home for a couple of months. That friend said they made several stops in Layla's car on the day of the murders, and even went to hang out with Robert Robinson at his so-called trap house. They left because it wasn't air-conditioned. That friend was later dropped off by Layla at her home, and Layla reportedly went to pick up the others. Both Robert and Christopher confessed to what happened, that they were planning to rob someone for marijuana while car hopping. Robert claimed one of the victims, the affidavit didn't say which one, was directing Layla to a location where they could commit burglaries. Layla was doing a U-turn, and that's when she was shot and killed while at the wheel. So who shot who? Well, according to the arrest affidavit, Taj Bruton shot and killed Layla and Michael. When that happened, Christopher Atkins took off running when her car hit the dumpster. When he returned to the car, Taj allegedly then told the 12-year-old there was someone in the trunk of the car. And as you heard from the sheriff in that press conference, Camille was there by choice for some reason. Christopher allegedly told police that he was forced to shoot Camille by Robert, who allegedly said if he didn't do it, Christopher's whole family would be killed. He shot her, but didn't think that she was dead, so Robert finished the job. According to the report, Christopher didn't even know Layla, Michael, or even Taj prior to that day. But the 3 of them took Layla's car to the pond. With now Taj behind the wheel after dumping her body, they took Layla's car to the lake, dumped Michael's body in a ditch, then drove her car to a pond, and that's where the car was discovered with Camille still in the trunk. Now we're still years after that horrible, horrible crime, and the 3 teens are a little bit older, but they're still teenagers. Taj Newton is now 18, Robert Robinson is now 19, and Christopher Atkins is now 14 years old. While Robert and Taj await trial for the murder, Christopher took a plea deal. He still faces anywhere between 40 years to life in prison, but because of his age, will be eligible for parole after 25 years. But there's a huge stipulation. Christopher has to testify against his other co-defendants when they go on trial, which is supposed to happen this July. There is so much to break down in this case, so I'm joined now by trial attorney and federal litigator Alexis Rosenberg. Alexis, thank you so much for joining me today. You know, before we get into the plea deal, let's talk about the case overall. We have 6 teenagers, 3 are dead, the other 3 are murder suspects, well, murder co-defendants now, but what's your reaction to this case, especially seeing and knowing just how vicious it was?
It's a horrible situation. We can't get around that. We have 6 minors that, the allegations are that they went out to rob houses together, and 3 of them end up dead. It's very sad, with the youngest at the time being only 12.
Yeah, 12 years old, such a young age. Like, I just remember being 12 and, it's completely different, just my experience versus what this defendant's experience was. But what do you make of just authorities talking about, all the robberies that they were planning on committing that day, the burglaries that they were planning on doing? And in your opinion, is that something that you see often, maybe possibly particularly in Marion County? I know you're not from that area, but in that area specifically, what are your thoughts about that?
So what's come out is that at least the three that are, have been charged with the crime were part of a gang. There are some allegations whether the other three were also part of a gang. So I think that what's really concerning about this is because that they're all minors, but we have a 12-year-old. So was the 12-year-old coerced into doing this? What was the situation? I mean, even if we don't say he was coerced or threatened, we have a situation where he was pulled in by much older teens. I mean, the other teens are 16 and 17 years old. That's a huge age gap. So, that's concerning as well. And he came forward. He has, now pled guilty. And he seems to be, even at the young age of now 14, trying to take responsibility for his participation in this gruesome crime.
And normally it seems like when we cover these types of cases, as far as young defendants allegedly committing very violent acts, especially murder like we have in this case, normally the victims are family members or relatives or someone kind of close to them. But from this case, it doesn't seem like all of them knew each other particularly that well, to the point that you could even really say that they were friends. It seems like some people knew others, but others didn't know the others, that type of thing. And it's a really kind of a tangled web just as far as their previous relationships prior to the day of the murders. But as far as just your reaction to them not really knowing each other that well, what are your thoughts on that, especially given, you do have a 12-year-old boy who now will spend what could be the rest of his life in prison?
So you nailed it. It is a tangled web. And there seems to be some missing pieces that haven't come out or they're not releasing as to the connection, how they were there, what was the actual motivation. Not that you have to prove at trial motive, but a jury likes to hear what the motive was. What was the motivation to actually have these three children killed? Why was that? So, that's going to be interesting. And as well as now we know that the 12-year-old who's now 14 is planning on testifying at trial against the other two. So, I mean, and they're saying that, like you had mentioned, that his sentence is going to be, or the plea that has been offered, and I guess he's agreed to take at this point, is life in prison with possibility of parole. Now, him being that young is interesting in Florida because in Florida, first of all, if somebody has been charged with first-degree murder in Florida, if they're under the age of 14, the state attorney gets to determine if they're going to even be charged as an adult. So first, that decision has been made. Then we also have, when you come to first-degree murder, the Supreme Court of the United States has held that it's unconstitutional to have a minor be sentenced to death. So usually what happens in Florida, even if a minor is sentenced, it could be commuted to 25 years with possibility of parole. And that gets a little complicated in Florida, what's going on having to do with that. But I think we need to keep in mind that this particular defendant is 12, was 12 when this happened. And, to even, like you mentioned, sentence him to life, possibility of parole, and potentially getting out in 25 years. That's at 37. I mean, that's 37 years old. That is a long time for a 12-year-old, and these possibility that he potentially was coerced or threatened to do these acts.
Now, I want to go back to one point you had mentioned about the motive in this case. And it seems like from reports I've been reading, it was just about they were planning to buy this gun on social media. Then one of the suspects thought that someone was going to snitch on them. And then they shot just pretty much all the victims here. But what are your thoughts just on this alleged motive behind the crime? Because it seems like if they thought snitching was going to be the reason for carrying out these acts, which is still horrible in itself to talk about, to say that. But what are your thoughts just about that particular motive, that they thought that they were going to be snitched on?
So, a trial, once again, the prosecutor doesn't have to prove a motive, but a jury always wants to hear some sort of motive. I mean, that's to be snitched on is as good a motive as any other motive. It just sounds like, as the facts have, unraveled, that you got a group of kids. It's not really organized. It's not really put together. I don't think there was any plan. Maybe it was a reaction that they thought somebody was going to snitch. But the bottom line is, those other kids were part of this. So let's just say that they potentially snitched. They were part of what was going on based on what the allegations that we've heard. So, who knows? I mean, it could have just been, there was a discussion because it wasn't planned. It could have been a frenzy. And we have minors. We have minors here. So, who knows? I guess more facts are going to come out as we have this 12-year-old that's planning on testifying, but to that.
Yeah, and with that plea deal, he again, we were just talking about how he faces that significant amount of time. What are your thoughts just about the deal overall, especially that he'll have to testify against his other co-defendants? Do you think he's, again, he's just 14 years old now, but do you think he understands just the gravity of all that he has to do in order to even get this deal?
I don't think at 12 he understood the gravity of what was going on, and I don't necessarily think at 14 that he understands the gravity. My personal opinion is I don't think this was whoever was representing him, I don't think, based on what we heard, this is such a great deal. I mean, to me, that really, under the allegations that we have, that he was coerced, or he believes he was coerced, and he's testifying against the two other defendants who are significantly older. I would have thought that maybe they would have given him a better deal than 25, with possibility of parole.
Yeah, because to your point earlier, it's still a significant amount of time because he'll be nearly 40 years old, and that's like a third of his life, or most of his life at that point, just spent behind bars. And I was kind of digging around to see where all of them are housed, and all of them are still in the Marion County jail altogether, all three co-defendants. Are you surprised that they are all housed in the same jail together, especially given it's been about 2 years now since the crime? Maybe there were conversations had, maybe there were flights or kites that were sent through, and I just know this from watching jail TV shows, but maybe that they've devised a plan possibly while they were all in jail together to be like, let's get our story straight. Again, not knowing, the full extent of all of their relationships together. But what are your thoughts on them all just still being housed in the same jail together and how complicated that could possibly be?
Well, it's not surprising they're in the same jail because we have to remember, they haven't been convicted. So that they're going to keep them there for the trial. So that's not surprising. However, I don't think that's a concern about them trying to put their story together, because even in the same jail, they can pretty much keep them separated or put in things to prevent that from happening. What is kind of should be surprising to listeners, though, is remember, we now have at the time, 12-year-old, now 14-year-old, it's in an adult jail. So, I mean, just to put that in perspective, to me, that's like, how are you keeping that 12-year-old safe in jail? And how are you going to keep a 14-year-old safe in prison? So, I mean, to me, that is the bigger thing to really focus in on. But I don't think the jail can keep them separate pending the trial.
And how often are you seeing minors who are housed in adult facilities in Florida? Are you seeing that pretty often, especially, it seems like obviously from our end that we cover a lot of cases involving a lot of teens who commit types of different crimes and that sort. But it seems like for the most part, we see them go into juvenile detention. But here we have a case where, to your point, that they're in adult detention right now. But do you see that pretty often now?
Well, I mean, it's going to have to be a crime like first-degree murder, because in Florida, so if they are over the age of 14, then it's mandated from 14 to 17, if they commit first-degree murder, that they have to be tried as an adult. And that's going to put them potentially right away at that time, when that decision's made, into an adult jail, and then ultimately, if convicted, an adult prison. But if they're under that 14 breakpoint in Florida, then it's the decision of the state attorney as to, and they're going to look at various factors related to that. As in this case, it was 3. We had 3 murders. It wasn't 1. So whatever, they looked at that factors and made that decision. Once they decide that that individual or that child is going to be tried as an adult, then generally they are pretty quickly moved out of the juvenile system because they're now being tried in the adult system, and they therefore would be placed in an adult jail. They do, like I mentioned before, they have to have safety measures because you still have a child in with adults. But it's not a good situation for that child at all. I mean, jail is not a good situation anyways, but to be a 12-year-old trying to navigate that, it is a really bad situation.
And, as the other co-defendants are approaching trial, which is supposed to start in July, what do you think a trial like that could really look like? And at this point, do you think that the other co-defendants will try to get a plea deal too?
Well, generally, as defense attorney, you're always looking to see what the plea deal is on the table. And in Florida, it's ultimately, we have state attorneys instead of district attorneys. They're the same thing. It's ultimately the state attorney's decision as to what the deal is going to be offered. So there could be a deal that is offered that they decide to take right before trial happens. We don't know. Also, we don't know what is being offered. There may not be a deal on the table, especially considering that they have the 12-year-old that's going to be willing to testify. So, and another thing, the state attorney is going to also, and even district attorneys, they also look towards, what the victims are saying, the victims' families are saying, and how they feel. They take that into consideration as well. So there may not be a deal, because remember, the deal that 12-year-old took, like I said, in my opinion, I don't think it's that great of a deal. They weren't really giving that much to him. So, they may be not offering a deal at all at this point.
Yeah, especially since the maximum end is still life in prison, which he might have already gotten had he just been convicted by a jury, if he would have been convicted by a jury. And even in terms of, defense strategies for the other two teens who are still going to be facing trial, what do you think that could even look like? Is it just the seating arrangement in the car because they have to kind of put together who shot who and where? Is it them kind of pointing the finger at one another? Because to me, just kind of looking at it, and obviously I'm not a lawyer or anything like that, but I'm wondering, did they offer the youngest co-defendant a plea deal in order to kind of piece everything together, because maybe he would have been the easiest one to kind of get that information out of, as opposed to the older teens?
So Florida has what's called felony murder, which means that if somebody dies during the commission of a felony, which robbery would count as that, then you don't really have to prove who pulled the trigger. So from a defense strategy, was this done during the commission of the robbery, is really going to be the focus, or was it that had ended, like the conspiracy or plan or the actual robbery had ended in time, and now we have this situation where these three were murdered, and then you are correct, who pulled the trigger, what was going on, all of that. But because there's three of them, we also, you have their conspiracy to commit murder, because this is first degree. So remember, that requires premeditation. This wasn't that we had reckless. So there was premeditation. So there was a conspiracy for all of them to commit this first degree murder. So, it's going to be interesting what the lessers and what they go and what's on the jury verdict form. That it will really depend on that actual, ultimately, defense and strategy at that point.
And it seems like, again, with just a couple months away from that trial, it's just a sad situation all around, just a horrible case. And we cover a lot of horrible stories, but this one really just kind of resonates here. Alexis Rosenberg, I want to thank you so much for your time. Before we sign you off, though, what do you think will happen next with the entire case?
I think it's going to go to trial. I think it is. I think it's because based on the offer that was made to the 12-year-old, and probably the victims, because we have three different families, are going to want a trial. And I do think probably ultimately they're going to be convicted.
Yeah, and again, just a horrible situation all around. And again, Alexis, I want to thank you so much for your time and your insight into this case. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me as well.
And again, the triple murder trial is set to begin in July of this year. Earlier this month, Taj Bruton was sentenced to 20 years in prison on an unrelated charge. But as of this recording, all 3 co-defendants remain in the Marion County Jail. Christopher Atkins' official sentencing will happen at a later date. Reporting for Law and Crime, I'm Elizabeth Millner.